All systems go. Meine Damen und Herren, es freut mich, Sie hier willkommen zu hören. Oh, am I supposed to do this in English? Well, I don't know what you all expected here, and I hope I don't disappoint you, but if you want to hear all about Austria's history and the artwork and the literature and all that, you've come to the wrong place. I am not professorial at all. What I'm going to do is share with you some of the memories that I have of Austria and hope that you enjoy that. These will be personal interpretations. So what are my qualifications for doing all this? Well, I was born in Vienna and I lived there for the first 8 years of my life until Mr. Hitler came in and annexed us, and then I left. So for the past 86 years I've been a full-blooded American. I've been here for 86 years, but I was lucky enough during the Korean War I joined the Air Force, and while a lot of people were headed west and fought an awfully bloody war, I really lucked out because the Air Force happened to need a small number of people who knew how to speak German. And guess where they sent me? To Austria. So I spent the four of the best years of my life in Austria while all this nastiness was going on. And while I was in Austria, I met and married a wonderful girl. And that's part of the reason that we went back to Austria so often, because we had friends and family there. So we made several trips back, short duration, but we were tourists also. And the amount of research I did for this show is not worth mentioning. Okay, there are many beautiful villages in Austria that nestle next to a beautiful lake and by a wonderful mountain. This one is particularly close to my heart because it was where my parents met in a mutual friend's house. My grandparents had a villa there, and it's the place where I spent the first 8 summers of my life. It's a really beautiful village. A lot of people, a lot of tourists come there to enjoy swimming in the lake and walking in the mountains. And there's a mountain there called the Schafberg, from the top of which you have a beautiful 360-degree view. It's just marvelous. It's so nice that they built a hotel on the top of it. They built a cog-tooth railway that goes up there. And there sits my daughter, hoping I'm not going to mention the time that she was up in the hotel at 6 years of age and managed to lock herself in the ladies' room. Sorry about that, Audrey. Other than that, there's not much about St. Wolfgang that's different. It's absolutely beautiful, but there's one thing that distinguishes it from all else. And it houses in the church an absolutely magnificent work of art. The altar is known throughout Europe, and its artist, Michael Pacher, really gained his fame with this piece. It really is gorgeous. The critics fall all over themselves, commenting on the paintings on the side and on the detailed sculptures of the centerpiece. It's wooden carving. The statues all stand separately. Individually, it's just a beautiful piece that's generally recognized. And Pacher is credited with bringing Renaissance techniques to Austria and Germany. Well, the first time we went back to Austria, we took our 2 girls there. They were ages 6 and 8, and we showed them this altar, and ages 6 and 8, they thought it was pretty in a ho-hum kind of way. But they did find in St. Wolfgang, not in the church, but they found in St. Wolfgang a statue that they really, really liked. It was on a fountain, It was on a fountain next to the church, and they liked it so well that they gave it a name. So I'd like you to meet Mr. Itchy Butt. You never know what's going to turn out to be memorable. All right, let's leave Wolfgang now and go to a place called Hallstatt. Hallstatt is another beautiful village, also between the lake and the mountain. It has its own claims to fame, not the least of which is that several scenes from the Sound of Music were filmed there. But the feature that made it memorable for me has to do with the fact that Hallstatt is built on a rather narrow strip of land. You can see that between the lake and the mountain there's not very much. It's sort of narrow. That's why the houses are crowded together like that, and the Hallstatters are just very stingy with their space. You won't find any parks or spacious gardens or anything like that. Also, they save a lot of space by making their cemetery very, very small. It's so small that you can only bury a few people there. And they have adopted a practice of, after just a few years of having somebody buried, they would dig them up again to make room for another deceased burier. Now, you may think that this is a barbarian habit, but let me assure you that the Hallstatters are very respectful of the remains of the people that they dig up. They clean up the bones and polish them, and they have built a chapel to house these bones. It's come to be known as the Bone House, and it is rather an unusual location. Wikipedia tells me that there are over 1,200 skulls in the Bone House today and thousands of bones. The skulls are all embroidered or engraved with the name of the deceased and the date of birth and the date of the dead, kind of stuff that we put on tombstones. And some of them are rather ornately decorated. And they're kind of pretty. Well, in case all this talk of skulls and cemeteries has got you a little antsy, hot under the collar, I will take you next to a place that's really cool. And it's cool literally as well as figuratively. Welcome to the Eiswiesenwelt, the ice giant's world. This is the largest cave, the largest ice cave in the world. And if you believe Wikipedia, it stretches for 26 miles. I have no reason to doubt that number, but they give me another number which is obviously ridiculous. They claim that the place is visited by 200,000 people a year. Well, if you do a little bit of arithmetic, that implies that every day of the year, on the average, every day of the year there would be 547 people, which is obviously absurd. So be careful when you consult Wikipedia. It's often a good indicator, but don't depend on it. Salt. Salt was a very important feature and commodity in the history of Austria. And the area, in the general area that I've been talking about, there were and are big salt deposits. The German word for salt is Salz, S-A-L-Z, and it gave its name to Salzburg, and indeed to the whole area, which is called the Salzkammergut. There are a number of salt mines in the area, and some of them let you visit. They give guided tours. And I think it was on our first trip back to Austria, it may have been one of the later ones, we visited one of the salt mines in Hallein, which is near Salzburg. And it's very interesting. We took the tour. The way the Austrians mined the salt was very interesting. They dig a great big cave down And the water dissolves the sides of the cave, and the salt goes into solution. And when it's reached its proper level of saturation, it gets piped down through a series of such caves. I think Haline had 7 of them, and it goes down to Haline, and the salt gets processed. Now, that's very interesting. That's an interesting way of mining salt, but that's not enough to make the place really memorable. What made the Haline salt mine memorable for us is the way that the miners devised to walk or get down with their tools from one level to another. What they got tired of carrying it down these endless stairs. So what they did was mount a pair of polished wooden rods, maybe 15 inches apart, a couple of feet above the ground, and they used those as slides. Now, if you go and visit the salt mine in Haline, they will give you a ride on these slides. And we took such a ride, and I look at this picture, it was taken recently. I don't remember all those lights. My memory is failing, but my recollection is when we went down that slide, it was like going down a deep, dark hole. And you get going pretty fast on those slides, and my adrenaline glands had their job to do. It wasn't very scary, and this family doesn't seem to have been very scared either. Another place near Salzburg that is memorable is a place called Hellbrunn. Hellbrunn is noted for its vast amount of clear water. In fact, Hellbrunn, Hell means bright in German, and a Brunnen is a well, so that's what it is. A guy named Marcus Sidicus was both an archbishop of the church and a prince. And he liked the place, so he had this building built that you see in the middle of the picture. And it's called a magnificent Baroque palais. And it's a wonderful residence, and the archbishop obviously liked it. It has a peculiar feature, however. It doesn't have any bedrooms. The archbishop always went back to Salzburg to sleep, so he didn't see any need to put any bedrooms in this building. So that's all very interesting too. Buildings, you can visit them by the dozen. What really made this place memorable was the fact that Marcus Sidicus was a practical joker, and he liked to use the water, of which there was so much in this place, to play tricks on his guests. The table in the foreground, for instance, and there's a stone table and stone chairs all around. And you might notice that the chairs, if you're sitting close enough, you might see that the chairs all have little holes in them. And they are not there to facilitate flatulation. They're there because when the meal had been finished, the archbishop, who sat at the head of the table there, gave a sign, and his minions turned on the water, which came up through those little holes and went down his guests. Well, if you go to Hellbrunn, there's like a dozen similar kinds of water games, they call it, Wasserspiele. And I'll tell you about one more of them that impressed me a lot. Mounted on the wall was like the bust of a magnificent stag. He had a wonderful set of horns, and the horns all pointed in different directions. And as you already probably guessed, when the archbishop gave the signal, each of the horns spouted water in all the directions, and everything was wet down except one spot, and that's where the archbishop stood. And the comment that I read was, today that spot is used by the tour guide. I almost didn't include this. It's a clock tower on top of a hill in a city called Graz. Graz is the second biggest city in Austria. And you may remember after the Second World War, both Germany and Austria were divided into 4 occupation zones, French, English, Russian, and American. And I was, of course, at home in the American zone in Salzburg. But they sent me for over a year to Graz to work with the British. Graz is the capital of Styria. Well, in Graz, like in many high places, they put clocks. They didn't have watches in those days. They didn't have these gadgets to tell them the time of day. And they tended to put clocks in high places, either in churches or towers like this. This is Graz's clock tower. And her name is Liesel, by the way. The indigenous people call that tower Liesel. Well, as I went to work in the mornings or walked around the town, I had a good view of Liesel. And I noticed that the hands of the clock were always in different positions. So obviously the clock was running, but they always told the wrong time. It was a real mystery to me. I pondered that, and then wow, I solved the mystery one day. It came to me. The hour hand was the big hand, and the minute hand was the small hand. That's why I thought it was always wrong. But if you stop to think about it, if you live a place where people don't have watches and they're far away, which is the important hand to see? The hour hand. So you make it big. You tell the time of day within about 15 minutes just by looking at the hour hand. So that is a very personal memory of Austria. Okay, enough of places. Let's talk about the other important thing about Austria, and that is food. Food, the Austrians are very fussy about their food, especially the Viennese. And in their book, the Germans are absolute barbarians. They cook with a jar. They're almost as bad as the British. Well, my father was Viennese, and he was very fussy about his food. And my mother was born and raised in Berlin, in Germany. Well, that had the makings of an imbroglio, but some of my mother's friends got together and presented her with a book, a cookbook, called So kocht man in Wien. This is how you cook in Vienna. It's a very modest volume. It only has 568 pages of very fine print. And if you doubt me, I invite you to visit me in E7. It is on my bookshelf, and I have on occasion made recipes from that book, a couple of which my family has come to enjoy. In fact, the Bauernkraut, which Lena knows, is Matthew's rubbing his hands. I often bring that as a side dish to whichever of my children is hosting the Thanksgiving that year. Anyhow, the best known dish in Vienna is, of course, the Wiener Schnitzel. Same name as the fast food outfit here that has nothing to do with Wiener Schnitzel. And the story about Wiener Schnitzel is that one day my wife was an excellent cook, and she was making Wiener Schnitzel on the day that Audrey brought her boyfriend over to our house for the first time. It was 40 years, I know it was 40 years ago, because they're going to celebrate their 40th anniversary in September. So this was the first time that Bob visited us, and he really liked the Wiener Schnitzel. And a couple of weeks later, sometime later, he came back to our house for a visit. In the course of the afternoon, he asked my wife, "So, when are you going to make some more of those Schnitzelgrubers?" Well, with that, he introduced a word into the Polk vocabulary, and that word stuck, and it is used quite often because we tend to get together as a family, whole family, and we have Schnitzelgrubers every once in a while. Well, the whole family is quite a bunch of people, 40 14, 15 at a time. And one year, it was at our house that the Schnitzengruber feast was, and somebody caught the chef in the act. I had just I'd finished breading the veal cutlets, and they were not yet, I was getting ready to fry them, and here's a plate full of the Wiener Schnitzel for the Schnitzengruber. I was not the only one. Here's Audrey a couple of years later with her Schnitzengrubers. And just last month, Matthew and Shauna did the honors. A place that had very good food that my wife and I liked when we lived in Salzburg. We used it on special occasions. It was a place that also made beer. And I decided for my 85th birthday, I'd like to go back to Austria and have my 85th birthday at the Augustiner Bräustübel. And the Austrians were so fond of that, they even made a commemorative stamp of the Augustiner Bräustübel. And it's one of the biggest restaurants that combines a brewery with a restaurant in all of Austria, for sure. It was established in 1621. And it says today it's the biggest beer restaurant in Austria. Okay, a couple of years ago, Audrey and her sister, who is currently in Portugal, my two girls, decided they wanted to visit Austria in the winter time. And they did so, and they visited several Christkindlmarkt. These are sort of like farmers markets that are there temporarily for about a month before Christmas time, and they sell a variety of Christmas paraphernalia. Wreaths, candles, stuff like that. Advent calendars, toys. So they saw several of these in various cities, and among the cities we visited one of them was Vienna. And in Vienna, if you ask people, I'm sorry, I should have said, among the foods that Austrians treasure are the sweets, the desserts, the cakes, those things. And in Vienna, if you ask somebody, where do you go to get a good piece of chocolate cake, they'll refer you to the Hotel Sacher, which makes Sachertorte. Now, there's an interesting history there because for many years there was literally a serious feud between Mr. Sacher and Mr. Demel. Excuse me. A serious feud which was ultimately settled by a court who awarded the trademark Sachertorte to Mr. Sacher. Mr. Demel never got over it, but Mr. Demel also runs a very fine hotel and delicatessen that would put Brents to shame. Okay, so naturally, my girls had to try the Sachertorte at the Hotel Sacher, and it was pretty good stuff. It's a little on the dry side, I think. That's why they always serve it with Schlagobers, whipped cream. And in Austria, whipped cream is whipped cream. Not this airy stuff that you get at the supermarket that you squirt on things. It's whipped cream. And if you want to get a Sachertorte, you have to go to a good restaurant. But if you notice the cup of coffee, this is Kaffee mit Schlag, coffee with whipped cream. Do you need it? Kaffee mit Schlag you can get in any coffee house in Vienna. But when it comes to chocolate, there are two kinds of chocolate that are absolutely the best as far as my family is concerned. And the girls were asked to bring some of these home. One of the kinds of chocolate, one of the two kinds, is a chocolate called Il Defonso. And it's a little 1-inch square cube it just melts on the tongue. It's wonderful stuff. The other favorite of the Polk family has a story associated with it. There was a town called Bad Ischl. It was one of the favorite places that the Emperor Franz Joseph. Is everything okay back there?
I think I need to
It's where the Emperor Franz Joseph. Excuse me just a minute. Okay. When the Emperor Franz Joseph spent let's give Nadine a moment to get out the door. Hope you feel better, Nadine. The last emperor of Austria was named Franz Joseph. It's to Bad Ischl that he came when he wanted to go bathe and have his summer vacation. And one of the places, well, let me start from another end. St. Wolfgang, the village I talked about first, is very close to Bad Ischl. And my grandfather, who had the villa in St. Wolfgang, every once in a while on a beautiful Sunday, he would take us to Bad Ischl, and he and my family would promenade along the paths at the sides of the Traun River. The lighting on this picture doesn't do the river justice. When the sun is out, the river is a deep, dark, beautiful green, and walking along its edges is a nice walk. When I remember it when it didn't have all those cars parked there, of course, in the 1930s, there was a lot more greenery. I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and I hated that. You know, who likes to walk for an hour along the side of a river doing nothing? It was terrible. And after that, we'd go to the town square to hear the musicians play. That was okay. But after that, we went to a konditorei, a confectionery named Zauner, which was also frequented earlier by the Emperor Franz Joseph. Well, if I had been a good boy and not made any trouble along this long, boring walk, I was allowed to go up to the Zauner showcase and pick among their various things that they exhibited. Well, the Zauner showcase at the time was not quite as elaborate as it is today. This is the Zauner showcase today. It's kind of incredible, but you know, the one I remember, it was a bit smaller. It didn't take me long to come up with my favorite, which is called Zaunerstollen. Stollen is just the shape of the cake, which is like a long loaf of bread. That's a Stollen. And the Zaunerstollen is Mr. Zauner's signature piece. This is what it looks like, and it really is delicious. Over the last few years, I spent the money necessary to buy one of these each Christmas for each of my family, even though the shipping costs were horrendous. Well, I told you that my girls were over there, and they certainly visited Saunders, and they had orders from all the family. Bob was shaking his head. They had orders from all members of the family to bring back some ildefonsos, little squares, and some Zaunerstollen. And they did, they bought it, they were very conscientious. And when they got ready to pack, they laid it out on a bed in their hotel to make sure they got the right amount. And they took a picture of it. So these were the Zaunerstollen and the ildefonsos that my daughters brought back. Okay, enough of the chocolates. This is another icon, a Viennese icon. This is a fiacre. Oh, by the way, he's parked next to the Manner. You see the name Manner on the building. That's one of Mr. Manner's shops. He's the one that made the wafers that you got to taste before the performance here. Anyway, the fiacres, the horse-drawn carriages, were a major vehicle for transportation when I was a kid still. I used to stand on the second floor where our home was. Parenthetically, the second floor in Vienna is what you would call the third floor, because in Vienna and most of Europe, I think the ground floor doesn't deserve a number. Anyhow, I used to stand at the window and I'd watch what was going on in the street, and I'd see both fiacres and cars. Cars were not, there were lots of cars in Vienna too, but they hadn't totally replaced the fiacres yet. Today the fiacres are mostly for the tourist trade, and you can see them line up at the tourist places. And for a few euros, you can get a ride in a fiacre. Now this fiacre is pretty fancy. You look at the coach and it's pretty elegant. The horses are well groomed, and the rider is dressed up. The fiacres I remember are more like the ones in this painting. Not exactly shabby. They're okay, you know. They're workhorses. In this painting, they're taking their rest, eating out of their food bags. The driver's taking a rest. But the horses weren't anything special. But if you want something special in the way of horses, Vienna has that to offer too. They are home to a breed of horse called the Lipizzaner. They're white stallions, and they've been raised since the 15th century as show horses, and they're absolutely magnificent. For many years now, their home has been in the Spanische Reitschule, in a Spanish riding school, which is right next to the Hofburg, right next to the palace. And the training goes on there, and both the riders and the horses are trained in the Spanische Reitschule. And the source I looked at tells me that this training, until here's where they're training. The training takes up to 3 years until they're ready to perform. But when they're ready to perform, they perform some absolutely incredible maneuvers. One of which is called a cabriole. And in this maneuver, the horse leaps straight into the air with no forward motion at all. And at the height of its leap, it kicks back with its hind legs. Those of you who are close to the screen might be able to see the sand right under the front hooves of the horse. It went straight up from where it was standing. Okay, so I picked this picture to conclude my talk, say farewell. This is the riders and the Lipizzaners entering the arena, usually to a packed audience of enthusiastic spectators. So I'll close this by saying I can't bring myself to say goodbye to Austria. So even though my flying days are behind me, I'll use the classical Austrian farewell, which is Auf Wiedersehen, till we meet again. Okay, Lena, I'm ready to turn this over to you, except if you have any questions. Thank you all. You've been a magnificent audience. Thank you very much.